Most women don't really understand men. Not because they don't care, but because they believe they already do. They see the surface, the silence, the distance, the stubbornness, and think they've figured men out. But what they often miss is the storm beneath, the pressure to be everything, feel nothing, and never ask for help. Hi, I'm Vernon. In this video, I'm going to talk about 6 things women don't understand about men. Not the shallow stuff, but the quiet truths that shape how we love, how we hurt, and why we often pull away right when we need closeness the most. If this kind of wisdom speaks to you, subscribe to my channel. Not for me, but for yourself. Because all the things I share here took me over 40 years to learn the hard way. No one should have to walk that road alone if they don't have to. So let's open that door together and take a closer look at what's really going on inside the hearts of men.
1. Most men don't feel safe being vulnerable, even with the person they love. It's not that there's no desire to open up. It's that somewhere along the way, vulnerability became a risk. The moment a man reveals his doubt, his fear, his ache, something sacred feels exposed. And in that exposure, there's the threat of judgment, of losing respect, perhaps even love itself. From a young age, many men are handed a quiet script. Be steady, don't flinch, fix what's broken, but never admit that you're broken too. Over time, these messages don't just shape behavior, they become part of the scaffolding that holds the self together. So when someone leans in and says, "Talk to me, tell me what's really going on," it might sound like a simple invitation, but for the man on the other side, it can feel like being asked to tear down the very walls that have kept him intact. Not out of pride, but preservation. Not because he doesn't want to connect, but because connection has never felt safe. In that hesitation lies a truth many overlook. Silence isn't always absence. Sometimes it's the sound of someone protecting the last place they know how to feel whole. As Seneca once said, sometimes even to live is an act of courage. For many men, to feel deeply and show it can feel like surrendering a carefully built structure, a structure made not of arrogance, but of survival. But here lies the quiet tragedy. Without vulnerability, intimacy remains just out of reach. Without the freedom to be seen, truly seen, love becomes mimicry. All the motions, none of the meaning. Emotional distance is often mistaken for coldness, but sometimes it is simply self-preservation. And what may appear to be strength is in truth a well-rehearsed form of hiding. Understanding this isn't about excusing the behavior, it's about seeing the conflict within it and offering something rare in return, a space that feels safe enough to try again. Not all men will walk into that space, but those who do will not show up as performers, but as people. And if that truth unsettles something deep within, then perhaps it's time to explore what else has been left unsaid.
2. A man's worth is often tangled in his ability to provide, and that weight is heavier than most realize. Ernest Hemingway once said, "Man is not made for defeat. He can be destroyed, but not defeated."
To provide is more than just to give. It is to affirm existence. In a world that praises production, many men learn early that their value is tied to what they can offer. Provision becomes a quiet language of love, expressed through effort, through sacrifice. But here lies the tension. When love depends on usefulness, it starts to feel like a contract. And deep down, the unspoken fear rises. If I stop giving, will I still be enough? Aging, job loss, illness, these are more than disruptions. They are reckonings. They strip away the routines that once made life feel stable, and with them the roles that gave life direction. When doing becomes impossible, being stands exposed. And in that stillness, many are forced to face a kind of grief that rarely has a name. The quiet mourning of usefulness, of identity, of a version of self once tightly held. What was once instinct, to offer, to fix, to lead, now becomes memory. And in the absence of function, a deeper question emerges. If I am no longer needed, am I still worthy of love, of presence, of being seen? This isn't just about men. It's about anyone whose worth was once tethered to performance. But for men especially, raised in the shadow of expectation, this moment can feel like erasure. And yet, there is also potential here, a space to discover a deeper truth, that value was never in the doing, but in the being that remained when everything else fell away. But maybe this is where love reveals itself, when it sees the person, not the function, when it holds space for stillness, not just action, when it says, "You matter, even when your hands are empty." The deeper question isn't, what does he bring to the table? It's, who stays when the table is bare? And perhaps it's in that question, in that stillness, that we find the doorway into the next truth, one that asks us to reconsider not what men give, but how they cope when they feel they have nothing left to offer.
3. Men often grieve in silence, and many don't know they're grieving at all. There's a kind of pain that doesn't come with tears or words. It doesn't cry out. It doesn't ask to be witnessed. It just sits quietly beneath the surface, shaping how a person moves through the world. For many men, grief isn't recognized as grief. It shows up as withdrawal, as short tempers, as silence, as a sudden obsession with routine or work. It looks like distance, when really it's a kind of drowning without the splashing. Imagine the man who buried his grief when his father died, not with a eulogy, but with silence. He showed up to work the next day, nodded when people offered condolences, and went home early, not to cry, but to fix the garage door, mow the lawn, and keep moving, because stopping meant feeling. Or the man who, after retirement, lost more than a job. For 35 years, he wore the same routine like armor: coffee at 6, desk by 8, home by 6:30. After the farewell cake and handshakes, he found himself staring out the window at 9:15 a.m., wondering why the silence felt so loud. Then there's the man whose divorce didn't explode, it faded. No yelling, no betrayal, just two people drifting, until she left and he stayed. And for years after, he spoke of it as if it were a paperwork issue, but his smile never quite reached his eyes again. These are not rare stories. They are everywhere, tucked behind small talk, disguised as normalcy, and they are grief in its quietest form. Not all grief makes a scene. Sometimes it whispers, a missed opportunity, a dream let go of quietly, a friendship that faded without anger, only distance. These moments don't shatter the soul all at once. They chip away slowly, silently, until one day the reflection in the mirror feels unfamiliar. And here lies the deeper truth. Unresolved grief doesn't stay in the past. It reshapes the present. It influences how love is given, how trust is formed, how the future is imagined. The question isn't just, what has he lost? It's, what has he buried so deeply, even he no longer has the words for it? Recognizing this isn't about diagnosing. It's about humanizing. It's about remembering that beneath the still face is a story, and often a sorrow waiting to be seen. In many cultures, men are taught to process pain through doing, not feeling. So the emotions don't vanish, they just take other forms. And the danger is, when grief has no voice, it eventually becomes a weight no one sees, until it's too heavy to carry. But here's the opening. Grief doesn't demand fixing. It asks for space, for acknowledgement, for gentle presence, to be seen without being solved. There's wisdom in learning to recognize silent grief, not as weakness, but as the evidence of a heart that once dared to care. And perhaps the real question isn't what's wrong with him, but what has he lost that no one ever asked about? Because if grief hides in silence, then what else might be hidden just beneath the surface, waiting not for answers, but for understanding? That brings us to the next truth, one that lives in the tension between strength and softness, between protecting and connecting.
4. Many men love through protection, but struggle to receive care in return. At the heart of many men is a deep instinct to protect, not just physically, but emotionally, to guard what they love, to anticipate harm and intercept it. This kind of love isn't always poetic. It's quiet, practical, often invisible. It shows up as checking the locks before bed, driving in silence when the mood is tense, fixing things before they fall apart. But while giving protection comes naturally, receiving care often doesn't. To be cared for can feel disorienting, like stepping into a role that was never practiced. Many men, even in loving relationships, find it hard to lean back and allow tenderness in. Not because they don't want it, but because somewhere inside they believe they're not supposed to need it. If any of this has quietly stirred something in you, a memory, a question, even a sigh, don't hesitate to like this video. not out of obligation, but as a way of saying, I see this, I've felt this, I want more conversations like this. Now, here's the paradox. The very act of loving by protecting can sometimes become a barrier to connection. When protection becomes control, when giving becomes a substitute for receiving, when strength becomes isolation. And yet, isn't it possible that the same hands that protect could also learn to receive? But the man who holds space for others might also need someone to hold space for him. This isn't about changing men, it's about expanding love. About allowing the same strength that shields others to soften just enough to let care flow inward. True connection lives there, in the balance. But let's not romanticize this too quickly. Some men reject care not out of humility, but out of fear. Fear that being held makes them weak. Fear that rest is failure. And this belief, if left unspoken, can calcify into loneliness, even in the middle of a relationship. So perhaps the better question isn't, why won't he let me in? But what has he been taught about being held? And that leads us to something even deeper. Because if strength becomes isolation, what happens to love when a man no longer knows how to ask for closeness at all?
5. Many men crave connection, but live with the fear that needing it makes them less of a man. What if the person next to you, the man you love, the one who provides, protects, shows up every day, is quietly wondering whether he's allowed to need you back? This is the ache beneath so many fractured relationships, a deep yearning to be close, tangled with an equally deep fear that needing closeness makes him weak. And so instead of reaching out, he retreats. Instead of saying, I miss you, he says nothing. And instead of holding a hand, he hides his own. The cultural message has long been clear. Independence is masculine and need is not. But love, real love, requires mutual dependence. It requires the courage to lean in, not just to stand tall. And yet, for many men, emotional dependence feels foreign, even dangerous, because to need is to risk. To say, I can't do this alone, is to admit a kind of vulnerability that manhood rarely makes room for. That's the quiet war happening beneath the surface. Not a lack of love, but a lack of permission to love fully, with need, with tenderness, with imperfection. If this reflection opens something in you, a quiet recognition, or even discomfort, that's worth honoring. Let the discomfort breathe. Let it ask new questions. And if you haven't already, consider liking this video to let me know this truth matters. But let's not assume all men are simply trapped. Many have begun to unlearn. Many long for intimacy that is not conditional, not performative, not earned, but offered. And here's the challenge. Closeness isn't just about being near, it's about being known.
And for some men, that kind of knowing still feels terrifying. So the question becomes, what happens when the man who wants connection doesn't know how to let it in? Maybe the answer lives in the final truth, one that touches not just how men relate to others, but how they see themselves when no one else is watching. Because sometimes the hardest person for a man to face is himself. And what he sees in that reflection might just be the key to understanding everything else.
6. A man's greatest battle is often the one he fights alone, with his own reflection. A mirror doesn't lie, it doesn't flatter, it doesn't soothe, it simply shows. And for many men, standing before that still surface can be the most vulnerable act of all. Not because of what's seen, but because of what can no longer be ignored. There comes a point in life, often quietly, without fanfare, when distractions no longer distract and the noise begins to settle. And in that silence, a man starts to face the harder questions. Who have I become? What have I outrun? What have I abandoned in the name of strength? This is where the inner reckoning begins, not with shame, but with recognition, the realization that the anger wasn't always about others, that the silence wasn't just stoicism, that the distance wasn't strength, it was fear, layered and practiced over years. But here's the opening. What's been built can be unbuilt, and what's been hidden can be named. Reflection is not condemnation, it's invitation, an opening back to wholeness if one is brave enough to stay in the mirror a little longer. If this moment, this truth, stirs something inside you, let it unfold slowly. And if this series has helped you hold a deeper space for the men in your life or for yourself, consider liking the video to keep these quiet truths alive. Because ultimately, the hardest truths are the ones that free us. And what a man sees in himself when no one else is watching will shape how he shows up for everyone when they are. And maybe, just maybe, understanding this is not the end of the story, but the beginning of something more honest, more human, and more whole. So we've gone through 6 truths, not told for the sake of explanation, but to offer reflection, to open a window into the quiet interior life of men. Not the myths, not the masks, but the real terrain underneath. Most women don't understand men, not because they lack love, but because they've only been given fragments. And many men don't understand themselves, not because they lack depth, but because they were taught to fear their own reflection. And maybe that's the thread through all of this: silence. Silent expectations, silent fears, silent grief, silent need. What we don't say becomes what we live out, quietly, painfully, often unknowingly. But here's the gift of awareness. Once seen, it can't be unseen. Once felt, it can't be unfelt. When you name the quiet things, they begin to soften. They begin to heal. They begin to move. So whether you're watching this as a woman trying to love a man more deeply, or as a man quietly searching for language to explain the ache inside, know this: you're not alone. These truths weren't shared to define men, but to dignify their experience.
And perhaps more importantly, to invite a new kind of dialogue, one grounded in gentleness, in patience, in presence. If any part of this spoke to you, I hope you'll share it. Not from me, but because there's someone out there, maybe someone close, who needs to hear these words, but doesn't know how to ask for them. Leave a comment, start a conversation, tell your truth. And if you haven't already, subscribe, not just for more videos, but for more moments like this, moments that remind us that behind every quiet man is a story waiting to be understood. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of yourself and take care of those you love. Until next time, I'm Vernon. Thanks for watching my video.